My name is Sulamed Vega Liviano, and I'm the Chief of the Watershed Planning Section in the Planning Division at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Jacksonville District. Today, I will talk to you about a portion of our current portfolio that focuses on active and forthcoming planning studies in feasibility phase under the Central Everglades Restoration Plan framework. We currently have 2 active aquatic ecosystem restoration planning studies and 1 forthcoming. And we also have an active flood risk management planning study in our portfolio. Our 2 active restoration studies are the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, or LOWP, and Biscayne Bay and Southeastern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Project, or BBCR. Our forthcoming restoration study is the Southern Everglades Feasibility Study. And our active flood risk management study is the Central and Southern Florida Flood Resiliency Study, which is a Section 216 study. And we also know the Central and Southern, or refer the Central and Southern Florida as the CNSF. Before we dive in each study, I want to provide a quick overview of the planning process. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers uses and applies a risk-informed decision-making process, which is included as a 5-step process, which means that the planning process is iterative. It's an iterative cycle in which all these 6 steps in the lower right corner are applied throughout the study time frame. The first step is the problems and opportunities, which is part of the scoping. The second step is the inventory and forecast, which is here represented under evidence and gathering and risk management. The third step is the formulation step, which is under the plan formulation box. We also have the evaluation and comparison. And lastly, the selection, which is part of the implementation part of the process. This iterative process helps reducing the uncertainty and increases the level of detail over time. Therefore, as the uncertainty is reduced, the level of detail is increased. As we move to the right here in this schematic. It is important to mention that each iteration helps to highlight key areas where additional critical information can be obtained to reduce decision risk. That critical information can be obtained in each of these in-between steps of the planning process. And is represented here in this graphic in the lower right as evidence and gathering. Now let's focus in the top graphic here, which is the planning process key milestones. The first phase of the planning process includes scoping. Scoping has as a key decision milestone the alternative milestone, which is represented by the number 1 here. By this milestone, the core team will need to define and will need to complete an initial iteration of the planning process, focusing within the 31st days after starting the study. Next, we have the alternative formulation and analysis. which their key decision point is the tentative selected plan milestone, followed by the release of the draft report, which includes an opportunity for public input, also input from the agencies, the tribal nations, among others. Next is the feasibility level analysis, which includes the agency decision milestone. That's where it starts. And ends with the final report and readiness brief, which provides the key to the next step of the planning process, and the last one, which is the development of the chief's report and approval eventually, but is for consideration for congressional authorization. Now let's focus on the lower left part here of this slide. I try to capture for you the different bars that represents the 4 different planning projects that I introduced to you earlier at this presentation. As you can see, the active and forthcoming studies are currently at different times in the process. The Lake Okeechobee the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, or LOWP, has undergone more than 4 iterations of the planning process, while the Southern Everglades have not yet completed the first one, which is located here, as it hasn't started. In contrast, you also have BBCR and the CNSF flood resiliency studies, which are working towards their tentative selected plan, which will be the next milestone. So now that you have a little bit of overview of the planning process, let's go into the projects. First, let's start with the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, also known as LOWP. LOWP is part of the Central Everglades Restoration Plan, or CERP. As a reminder, the Central Everglades Restoration Plan, or CERP, was approved as a framework for the restoration of the natural system to address the unintended hydrologic impacts of the Central and Southern Florida project in the Section 601 of the WRDA 2000. LOWP focused in addressing problems north of the Lake Okeechobee that will benefit the watershed by reducing the amount of frequency of the lake water releases into the Caloosahatchee and the Caloosahatchee and the San Lucie estuaries. The study area includes 5 subbasins within the Lake Okeechobee watershed, and includes portions of the Glades, Highlands, Okeechobee, and San Lucie, and Martin counties, along with the Seminole Tribe of Florida Brighton Reservation. LOWP originally evaluated 3 out of 68 CERP components: the Lake Okeechobee Aquifer Storage and Recovery, or component GG, the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Water Quality Treatment Facilities, or component OPE, which is short for other project elements, and also the north of the Lake Okeechobee Storage Reservoir, or component A. Following several public, state, and agency and USAC legal and policy reviews between 2018 and 2022, the scope of the LOWP study was reduced to the 2 CERP components on display. The South Florida Water Management District completed a Section 203 study to address CERP Component A, north of the Lake Okeechobee Storage Reservoir, and was authorized for the future design and construction phase in WRDA 2024. Therefore, LOWP is no longer considering it, and we're moving forward with component GG and component OPE, Lake Okeechobee Watershed Water Quality Treatment Facilities, as I previously explained. Now let's focus on some of the physical and ecological challenges in this area. First of all, the main challenge is that there's a reduction in watershed storage, leading to extreme high and low Lake Okeechobee levels, which are detrimental to lake ecology and downstream ecosystems. Undesirable lake regulatory releases contribute to adverse effects to estuarine salinity and bioarea. There's also a substantial reduction in the spatial extent and functionality of wetlands. We can perceive a degraded habitat for fish and wildlife throughout the study area. And there's also a growing demand for dependable water supplies across users. All of these challenges led to the objectives currently identified in the LOPE study, which is to increase water storage capacity in the watershed, resulting in improved Lake Okeechobee water levels, improving the quantity and timing of discharges to the San Lucie and Caloosahatchee estuaries, restoring wetlands, improving water supply for existing legal users. The study team, through the planning process, identified a combination of 55 watershed aquifer storage and recovery wells, or ASR wells, with about 5,900 acres wetland restoration and recreational facilities as part of the best recommendation plan to address those objectives. LOPE significantly contributes to and advances the goals of SERP in the northern region by increasing the spatial extent of natural wetland areas while restoring the ecological structure, function, and dynamic processes of these areas and providing the native plant and animals abundance and diversity. As previously stated, LOPE reduces the amount and frequency of the lake water releases into the Caloosahatchee and San Lucie estuaries, which is mainly achieved by the ASRs, or the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Wells. However, technical uncertainties about the wells for recovery performance, water quality requirements, construction costs, and operation maintenance costs with ASRs have been a concern, and USAC headquarters has requested that USAC Engineering and Research Development Center, ERDIC, further investigate it. In addition, the study team identified the need to further advance the design of the wetland restoration areas, resulting in the need to request for more time and funding to accommodate the analysis. Therefore, additional time and budget was identified to complete the study, and the technical team is working on a request for additional resources. This will allow enough time for ERDIC to keep looking into the additional science needed on ASRs. Therefore, what is coming next? So right now, the study will continue to pursue the additional request for additional resources to increase the confidence in level of design, report revisions in coordination with South Atlantic Division and ERDIC, and continue their reviews. And right now, the study is targeting WARDA 2028. Next, let's talk about the southeastern portion of the system with the Biscayne Bay and Southeastern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration, or BBCR for short. The BBCR study area includes southeastern Miami-Dade County. The study area is bounded by the C9 Canal, or Snake Creek, on the north, the East Coast Protection Levee on the west, Everglades National Park to the southwest, and by Biscayne Bay to the east, including the nearshore areas of Biscayne Bay National Park, or BNP. The study area includes those SERP components and water sources that are most likely to contribute to achieving the project's goals and objectives for Biscayne Bay and nearby wetlands. The study area is also expansive enough to allow analysis over the broad and flat area due to complex hydrology. As you can see, we have the same graphic of SERP to remind everyone that BBCR is part of what the SERP Yellow Book components envision. Now let's talk about the Yellow Book components that are part of BBCR. First, we have the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Other Project Element feature, which focuses on the rehydration of wetlands, reduce unnatural canal flows, and restore sheet flow. Biscayne Bay Coastal Canals, or component FFF, which is maintain higher stages in C102 and C103 canals by constructing a 3.5-mile connection. The C111 North Spreader Canal, or component WW, which improves deliveries, enhance connectivity, and increase sheet flow in the Motorlands and Southern Glades. The North Lake Belt, or component XX, which captures and stores stormwater runoff from C6, C11, and C9 basins to use during dry seasons. South Miami-Dade Reuse, or component BBB, which provides a new source of fresh water to meet ecosystem restoration. West Miami-Dade Reuse, component HHH, which provide fresh water to meet demands for Bird Drive recharge and South Dade conveyance system, and Northeast Sharp River Slough. Now, what are some of the physical and ecological challenges in this area? So first of all, there's freshwater start wetland vegetation shifting to more salt-tolerant vegetation and subsequent decreasing biological diversity. There's also woody invasive plants invading the freshwater marshes. There's a loss of estuarine conditions in the nearshore areas, leading to negative effects on nursery and juvenile fish habitat. There's also unnatural canal pulse releases, which disrupt the habitat in and around canal release points. There's also an expansion of the Y zone, a loss of plant area that could result in peat collapse and ponding. There's also overdrainage by canals and ditches of freshwater wetlands within the project area, so they are not able to maintain their natural hydro period and therefore unable to store water naturally into the dry season. There's also overdrain of the coastal wetlands, saltwater intrusion, and absence of freshwater inputs from the Great Everglades resulted from barriers to sheet flow. As a result of all those challenges, BBCR has identified the following study objectives. First of all, to improve quantity, timing, and distribution of freshwater to estuarine and nearshore subtidal areas, including mangrove and seagrass areas. Restore freshwater depths, hydro periods, and flows for dry and wet seasons in terrestrial wetlands. Restore connectivity and habitat gradients in areas compartmentalized by the CNSF system. which is the Central and South Florida system in the Southern Everglades, Moorlands, and Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands, and increase and restore ecological resilience in coastal habitat in southeastern Miami-Dade County. The current status includes that the final array of alternatives has been identified, evaluated, and preliminary compared. However, due to the complexity and several study risks that have materialized, like the complexity of the hydrodynamic modeling and need to reduce uncertainty on the conceptual design, has resulted in a need to advance the maturity of the design. In order to continue the efforts in this analysis, a request for additional time and budget was proposed and coordinated within the USAC vertical chain. After thorough coordination, the BBC project was approved for $5 million federal to restart progress towards the TSP milestone or tentative selection plan. Right now, the current technical team is regrouping and will soon restart efforts, which includes to resume the final array discussion and evaluation. What is coming next? So next is the TSP milestone. So this current planning study is working towards completion of the tentative selected plan milestone, which right now is forecasted for summer 2025. Next, let's move to Southern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration Study, which is another of our efforts under SERP. As you can see, and if you compare it to the previous planning studies, we currently don't have an example, for example, a study area, project objectives, and focus problems identified as the study hasn't initiated yet. However, we know there are still some challenges on delivering water south and west into Everglades National Park and Shark River Slough to benefit the greater Everglades and Florida Bay based on the most current scientific information like the system status report, which help us inform how we should focus the next planning effort. Something else that we know is that the components ambition in this area from the Yellow Book may include storage, seepage management, and conveyance. As previously stated, the study objectives are yet to be determined. And right now, we are tracking that the planning study will kick off on September 2025 or the fourth quarter of FY25. Lastly, I would like to talk about the Central and Southern Florida CNSF Flood Resiliency Study under the Section 216, which is not part of SERP, but interacts with multiple ongoing federal efforts in the area. This study is under the authority in Section 216 of the Flood Control Act of 1970, as southeastern Florida has changed significantly from when the CNSF system was authorized and constructed more than 70 years ago. Some of these variables are population growth and development, extreme rainfall intensification, including frequency and intensity, and sea level change. Changing conditions in the system has decreased the ability of the hydraulic structures to make regulatory releases necessary to manage interior flooding and has increased saltwater intrusion into freshwater aquifers, which provides fresh water supply for a large part of the population. As the flood resiliency study is under the CNSF, the original objective of the study when it started was to enhance existing CNSF system water control structures functionality and capacity to improve flood risk management and resiliency, which has been degraded by inland inundation and change conditions within southern Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. All the study area for this particular study was comprehended by 4 planning reaches. Reach A, here at the top of the graphic in red. Reach B, which is represented by magenta color. Reach C, which is represented by blue, and D, which is an orange color. After multiple iterations with the vertical team and senior leaders and performing the initial steps of the planning process, the geographical area of the study was reduced and coordinated a path forward with USACE, the South Florida Water Management District, which is the non-federal sponsor, and the stakeholders. The path included to divide the study and pursue a study per planning reach as follows. Reach C, which is the blue one, the blue reach here and highlighted, is the focus of the CNSF flood resiliency study. Reach A was included in a Section 203 study for process with associated USAC agreements for technical assistance and federal services. And right now is currently supported by South Florida Water Management District and Broward County. The initiation of this study started in the 4th quarter of FY24 and is currently targeting WARDA 2026. Next is Reach B, which currently has been identified to be funded by FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, Resiliency Florida grant to repair some of the structures. And then Reach D has shifted to a future authorization or any forthcoming comprehensive Central and Southern Florida study due to the complexity of the area and interaction with BVCR. So the current status is that now that all these different efforts have been divided, Jacksonville District is focusing on Reach C. Therefore, additional time and budget is needed to complete the study and is currently under headquarters review for approval. While this request is reviewed, the technical team is currently on hold. So what is coming next? So the next, after pending approval of additional time and budget, the next milestone will be the tentative selected plan milestone, which right now is forecasted to be in March 2025. I would like to conclude my presentation today with this slide about the international significance of the Everglades. Again, my name is Sulamed Vega Liviano, and it has been a pleasure providing this overview to you. I hope you find it interesting and you learn a little bit with me today. Thank you very much for listening, and until the next time.